on to my presentation, which I have a hard time pronouncing it because it's Practical PowerShell Empowerment for Protectors. So first of all, thank you so much to our sponsors, because with our sponsors, this conference would not be here. Chocolate, Patch My VPC, Semperis, and ScriptRunner, thank you so much. My name is Miriam. I work at Microsoft. I recently worked at Microsoft as a security researcher. So if you saw the announcement, you still saw me as a security researcher, but I just started in June as security research program manager, which is similar to researcher, but a little bit more strategic. And I also wrote this book that you see here. Maybe the reason why some of you are here. But this book will be raffled at the end of the session. And I have good news and I have bad news. So the bad news is I don't have this book with me, so I can't sign it for you. But the good news are I convinced my publisher to sponsor one book so that it will be sent to the winner at the end of this conference. So who of you is some kind of consultant? Nice. Who of you is some kind of administrator? And who of you already heard the question, is PowerShell dangerous and should we disable it? And when I worked with customers, I often heard this question because many people are not aware of PowerShell's capabilities. And the answer is no. And if they ask again, really, do not disable PowerShell. And the reasons for it are quite simple. So if you look at a Windows operating system, there are so many languages that are pre-installed, languages that you are used in your daily context. What about CMD? What about C-script? And okay, in some cases I would like to disable Java, but that's my personal preference. But what about Microsoft.NET? Microsoft.NET is present and you need it for several operations, for several applications. Do you just disable Microsoft.NET? Do you disable CMD? No, you don't. When we are looking into Linux, do you disable the bash? No. Yes. GUI only. Okay. Or other shells. No, you never disable the shell. And that is the reason. It's not the language that is the problem. It is how you control it and what you make of it and how you secure your environment. And would you prefer a tool, a language that is easy to control, that is easy to monitor over an application that you cannot control or monitor? And in my case, I would say definitely yes, and that is PowerShell. So you should rather think, how can PowerShell support your organization? How can it help me? How can I integrate it in my daily processes? And as I said, it's not the language. In my past, I worked also as a PFE, Premier Field Engineer at Microsoft. That is some kind of a consultant. And I worked with customers. I did security assessments, and it was always the same problem. Identity as the new parameter. I'm preaching this since 8 years, so I don't think it's that new, but it's still, many companies do not recognize that. And it is important to protect your identities and not just say, okay, yeah, we are just here. Okay. Chaos. Yay. And, also look what your system needs. How can you harden it? What can you do to even protect it better? And last but not least, you also don't want to be blind. You want to know what is going on in your environment. So you want to review the log files. You want to implement a proper monitoring solution. So to summarize it, when you use PowerShell, it is clearly impossible to go unnoticed because of its great logging capabilities, and it also has so many great restriction possibilities. And in this session, we're going to look into what PowerShell provides and what you can do on a high level. And from each section, you can dive deeper in your own pace. One really great feature is DSC, Desired State Configuration. DSC has two modes. One mode is the push mode. Oh, maybe I should start with what DSC does. So DSC helps you to push or pull a configuration on systems, on servers, on endpoints, on whatever you like to. And there are two modes. One mode is the push mode. Like that, you can just take your own laptop and push the configuration out to endpoints that you want to configure. But there's another configuration mode, and that's even greater, which is the pull mode. So you can set up a server which has the configuration files or the configuration that you like to configure your systems with. And all the systems can be configured to just pull the configuration automatically. Like that, you can implement a self-healing configuration. Doesn't that sound great? So in case a junior administrator or an attacker changes something on your systems, after a configured time interval, let's say 15 minutes, the systems reset their configuration to the desired state. So I highly recommend looking into DSC. It's not easy. It takes some time to get there, but it is definitely worthwhile it. And there's also Microsoft 365 DSC, which was developed by some Microsoft employees, but not official Microsoft product, which also helps you with your Azure environment. So go there, look into there if you want to learn more. One other thing, when I worked with customers, when I scanned environments for security flaws, there was always one big problem that I found in, let's say, 98% of all security assessments that I performed. And I performed a lot. I assessed big companies, I assessed small companies, and really, and if I found out that all updates were installed properly, I was really surprised because that was not the regular case. And one of the reasons why this happens is that most companies use already great systems like WSUS, but they have not configured all the products they have in place, like C#, for example, Visual Basic. And like that, they are missing some updates if they did not configure them. What you can do, and what you should do, is to scan on a regular basis if updates are missing. And for that, we have here the script scan remote updates. For this demo, I will switch the projection mode, but I can't here. Duplicate. So let me. Can you a little bit bigger? Like this? And also like this. So we have the script scan remote updates. This relies on the scan updates offline script by Andrei Stoica. And I implemented some logic for a remote scan because the scan offline updates script was only intended to scan the local computer. And we have here some parameters. We can configure which hosts should be scanned. If nothing is specified, then the local host will be scanned, what we are doing in this example. When we are scanning for updates, we need, of course, a library where we can look what updates are missing. And we are using the WSUS SCN2cap, which is also the file that WSUS would rely on if you would configure it properly. Then we have also two parameters. Those are switches. So one is do not delete the cap file. So if you want to once download the file and then leave it there, use the switch. If you want to delete the cap file, if there is one in place, use the force switch. And then it downloads the cap file, if configured, and scans for update on the local server after it established a PS session. And we are just starting the scan right now. This takes a lot of time, so we are returning to the demo. You see it's downloading the file. This takes a long time. And we will look later into what we found. There are other great features. With PowerShell, you can control who can do what, when, and where. Well, maybe not always when. That's more just in time. But you can control who is allowed to do what and where. And we have, for example, the language modes. So the language mode that we are usually working in is the full language mode. That's the default. We also have some language modes that we usually don't use in regular scenarios. So the no language mode is usually for API interaction and allows no scripts, no script elements. We have the restricted language mode, which should only be used when you are working with localization files, which allows you to create multi-language scripts, that is localization files. So you also don't usually use the restricted language mode, but what we can use is this constrained language mode. With the constrained language mode enabled, PowerShell prohibits to run dangerous or risky elements, like, for example, accessing the arbitrary API, COM objects, or running C# code with add type. And that went a little bit too quick. Oh, here we go. So we can see what language mode is enabled by running the following command that you see here. You see, constrained language is enabled. And once we try to access the API and run a function, basically we want to run hello world. We want to write it, but over API, you see that it cannot invoke the method because the constrained language mode prohibits it. Just enough administration. Gia. So, yoo-hoo. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm very, very, very excited about Gia. And this is the fact since almost 8 years. In this session, I won't dive deep as I do in other sessions. So I'm still super excited about Gia. But when I went to customers in the beginning, I just learned about Gia and I was like, oh, that's such a great feature. With Gia, you can enable or you can configure which role is allowed to run which command and even configure the parameters. OMG, that is so amazing. What can you do with this cool feature? So you can really restrict the commands that can be run. And I went to every customer and said, hey, you have to enable Gia. You have to configure Gia. That's such an amazing feature. And the customers were also excited. But after they looked into it, they were like, well, that is a little bit complicated. How do I know which roles run which commands? Because I need to configure exactly that. And, well, that also made me think. And that was when I initially developed G-Analyzer. At some point, I did not have the time anymore to maintain it. So good Fred here took it over and is currently maintaining G-Analyzer. Thank you so much. And what you can do with G-Analyzer, and what people may not be aware of maybe, is on the one hand, there is an option to read a script file and put this script file into a Gia configuration. So all the commands that are included in the script file and the parameters can be turned into a configuration. Another feature that G-Analyzer provides is to also read script blocks and turn them into a configuration, a Gia configuration. So you can, for example, pipe the event log. You can enable that all script blocks are being logged. We get to that point later. And with that log, you can pipe that into G-Analyzer and create your very custom Gia endpoints. Another feature, and I have to say, this is not a security control, but it's important to mention nevertheless, is execution policy. With execution policy, you can protect your users from running scripts accidentally. So if they just download, for example, a script, and if they are in remote signed execution policy mode, you see the script was downloaded from the internet, and now we are trying to run it, and it will be blocked because we did not sign it and we did not allow it. But nevertheless, if an attacker really wants to run a script, it's still possible. So you can, for example, just pipe it into invoke expression. So it's not a security control. It just helps your users to not accidentally run stuff. But application control and code signing, if you have application control enabled, and application control is a huge feature, is a great feature. You can restrict a lot of things, and also PowerShell. And if you restrict PowerShell with application control, when application control is enabled, then the scripts will not run in full language mode. Constrained language mode is enabled, the one that you saw before. That means no risky elements are executed. And if files are signed, then of course they can run in full language mode. So you see here again, with application control enabled, constrained language mode is enabled, and you cannot just run API elements. So how would that look like? For example, if we are running C# code via add type, usually if you would just paste here C# code and run it with add type, if application control is not enabled, you can just access its functions. You see the get directories function here is here the function, and it works. It would just return all the directories. And yes, it's not the best C# code you ever seen, but it's a demo. And how that would work if application control is enabled. You can't even run a type, and with that, you also can't run the function.
Would it be allowed if it was in a signed script file?
If it was in a signed script file, yes. But that means that you know what you're doing.
I would do.
That's great. If you have maybe at some point downloaded a malicious file and accidentally or not accidentally executed it, so for example for security testing, then you might be aware of the following error message that you will just see here. So I use good old invoke Mimikatz, and if real-time protection is enabled, so I'm talking defender-wise, if you have another AV in place, of course, if you have it enabled in there as well, then you see that the script is blocked because it contains malicious context or content. And AMSI, there was also another great session on AMSI. AMSI works like that it hooks between the program, in this case PowerShell, that executes the code, and between the operating system. And before anything is executed, the code to be executed is sent to the local antivirus. The AV scans it and logs it and says, okay, yeah, the code is good. You can run it. In this case, PowerShell executes the code. Or it says, no, the code is malicious. And in that case, you just see the message here that you saw. Coming to logging, that is my favorite part, to be honest. I'm a big logging fan. One great feature that PowerShell provides is transcripts. Transcripts log. So first of all, we are just starting it manually here in this demo. We have an output folder, which is always in the user profile, documents, that's the default. And I'm just running some commands here that I want to log. Once transcripting is enabled, everything will be written to a log file. And we see here, that's the default folder. You see here all the details about the system, about the starting time, when did you start the transcript, and all the commands that were run, and also the console output. So you don't only see what commands are run, you also see what was returned. And for transcripting, you can, of course, enable transcripts by default if you want to see everything that is happening on your systems. In this case, I recommend having a network folder that is only writable so that nobody can read from it, and use variables like computer name and stuff to know where it's from, so that you also have it easier when you sort the transcript files. You can configure it using GPO, of course. Or you can also configure your PS remoting session to contain transcripts, which also means you can use GIA to use transcripts, to configure transcripts. And it's everywhere. You just use it. It's great. With that, let's see if our script resumed the scan remote update script. And you see it went through. It downloaded the WSUS SCN 2 cap. It scanned for updates on the local machine, and it found that there are 3 updates missing. And like that, the administrator can just easily install them and knows what is missing. But we are also talking about transcripts. And coming back from transcripts, we also have an option to see what was executed in our session. So first of all, we have, of course, the get history cmdlat. With that, you see the history of the current session. And that is important to note because it's only the current session. You see that there was only one command executed in this session. Where are the others? And those files, there are also history files that you can query. So we have here in the folder C users and the username, app data roaming, blah, blah, blah. We have the console host history file, which we can query and understand what was run. We also have a system history file. And now let's look what is in there. If we just run it, and this would just create output for every user on the system. If you just run it, you see that the current user that we are assessing here runs some malicious commands in their session, in their last session. Not in this session that we are running, but in another session. So they ran invoke mimikatz. They tried to discover some users and groups. And yeah, so like that, you can also have more visibility on what is happening in your environment. And going back, duplicate, extend. Going back to our slides. We have module logging. I wanted to talk about it for completeness. I, for myself, have not found a security use case other than troubleshooting your modules. So if you are developing modules, for example, it can be helpful to understand what is going on. But for security logging, I rather use ScriptBlock logging, to be honest. It has event ID 4103. You can configure it for Windows PowerShell and for PowerShell Core. So better configure it for both. They have a different path for configuration and different event logs. And if you want to troubleshoot modules in the current session, so you can either configure it for all modules, also entering an asterisk risk to configure all modules. But you can, as I said, if you just want to troubleshoot one module, you can also just turn it on in the current session. And to find all module logging events, it's quite easy. Just look into the Windows PowerShell log and the PowerShell core for event ID 4103. Yes?
Do you know if for PowerShell core...
Let me just give you the microphone so that we have your question on the tape.
Do you...
I don't make the same mistake twice.
Do you know if this for PowerShell 7 the policy is shipped in Windows or with PowerShell by default, or do I have to import ADMX?
You still have to import them. So at least in my demo environments. But they come with PowerShell 7. So if you install PowerShell 7, you have also the scripts and the files, and you just need to run the script and they install it automatically. ScriptBlock logging, one of my favorite topics. So ScriptBlock logging, if you would wake me during the night at 3 a.m. in the morning and ask me what event ID does ScriptBlock logging have, and I would answer 4104. So yes, I use this event a lot, and it's really, really useful. You can configure it again. Oh, and if ScriptBlock invocation logging is enabled, that just provides you more information about the start and the end. And to be honest, I never used it. So it just creates a lot of volume, and I have not found a use case where I would recommend ScriptBlock invocation logging. But maybe in some cases you might need it. I haven't found one for myself. You can again enable it for Windows PowerShell and for PowerShell Core. They have different configuration paths. For PowerShell Core, you also need the ADMX templates imported. And they also have different event logs where you can pull it from. And to get all the ScriptBlock logging events, again, you have here the PS Windows event log and PowerShell Core event log with ID 4104. And now we are coming to the last script for this session. We will look into the script Get-ExecutedCode. And with Get-ExecutedCode, we have several parameters. We have the parameter search word. So you can use that parameter to look for a specific word that you want to find in the event logs. We have the user ID if you want to search for a particular user. The level, this means is it informational, is it critical, is it a warning event? And we have the path, that means in which path was the script executed. And you might remember these lines from the slide before. So this is, we are looking for both, in both logs, if available, and looking for the Windows event. And we are creating a custom object with all the required attributes that we want to pull from the ScriptBlock logging event. And last but not least, and by the way, if there is so much code in one event that you cannot just have it in one event, then it's split into multiple events. And this is what I call a multi-part event. And with this script, it just gets everything back together in order so that you don't have to worry about those multi-part events. And last but not least, we have some filter options in the script. Let's run Get-ExecutedCode and search for the word Mimikatz. And you see, yes, oh no, my demo was reset. So you saw, sorry, demo gods. Let me quickly run. Let's see if we can get their favor back. I think I need to disable shortly Windows Update, not Windows Update, shortly the real-time protection, because otherwise the command would not go through thanks to AMSI. I do not have Mimikatz installed, so don't expect much when I run the command, but you will see what I mean from the logging script. And maybe it takes some time until, okay, it was there. Yeah. Now you see here we have invoke Mimikatz, which was just run, and it was logged into the ScriptBlock logging event log, or not the ScriptBlock logging event log, in the PowerShell event log. But ScriptBlock logging was responsible. Okay, if I say this some more times. We can also look for the commands that a certain user ran, and this is my local user that I just use. So you see also the prompt and stuff. So if you want to set up a good monitoring, I recommend filtering out the executed code that only contains prompt. You will see that every time you run a new command or a new script. And you see also all the scripts that were run. And now if we are looking, for example, for the path, you see all the files that we ran in the path of the demo. And if we are now only looking for path, you see I ran Get-ExecutedCode a lot. I also ran Get PS History. And I don't know why scan remote updates don't show up, but all hail to the demo gods. Thank you, demo gods, for at least showing me part of the demo. And with that, let me go quickly back to the slides.